Hello, Madcappers. We're just so excited that we are releasing our Winter Earflap Cap with visor after several months of testing the initial pattern and making some slight modifications. We couldn't decide which ear band to include, so we're going to give you both. One has a slight dip and the other more distinctive ear flaps that you can get closer to your ears with the addition of a little tie and toggle. I'm going to show you all of that and more. So we have two versions of the patterns to offer, a free download. There's two sizes to choose from, the regular or the average ladies size and the average men's size. Plus we have a 9 size full pattern package with full size pieces, and that will include the projector files as well. We just ask that when you print it out, just check the line for accuracy that you'll see on one of the pages. You want to make sure your printer output is set correctly so that the pattern coming out of your printer is the same size as the one that we put into ours. So I'm just trimming along the black outline on each page. The little black box keeps the pattern pieces the right size for either letter or A4 printers, so you just trim that extra away and you match up the circles for the free download, and the paid package you would match up the diamonds as well because there's a few rows of pieces. So this is the cap that has the distinctive ear flap band, and I have added a tie and toggle to it, so I'll show you how to do that. They both pieces come down far over the back of your neck and into your coat without being uncomfortable or awkward. The top is a 4-panel piece, and then the ear protection band has that shape going all the way around. You can turn it up at the bottom if you don't feel that you need to have your ears completely covered on a day that's not so cold. And you can see it does come down far at the back as well. I will show you how to cut it on the fold with this free download, and I'll show you also how to make it a little bit special with some trim at the end of the video as well. The top is a 4-piece top, and you'll see all the pattern pieces have a color shade around the outside. That will help you give a larger seam allowance. The one built into the black line is 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter. I will show you how to finish the pieces so that it's lovely on the inside as well as the out. But if you want to cover up that sewing on the inside, you can easily add lining. Just cut it on the bias. This is the page on our website where you'll find everything you need to know. So let's get started. We'll cut out our pattern pieces, and I'm cutting away that green shaded outline. I'm making the larger size, the men's average size. I cut to the black line because that has the 3/8 of an inch seam allowance built in. I'm using polar fleece and a Sherpa fleece, and I'm cutting my bands across that stretchy direction of the fabric. And you'll see the pieces will have that kind of instruction there. The free download, you're going to get a half band and you cut it on the fold so that when you cut it out, you're cutting through 2 layers and that fold is the center front. And so I'm going to use this gray and black buffalo check fleece for both of these hats as I show you how to use the pieces for the 2 different band options. So this is the one with the defined ear flap, and I'm going to add a cord and a toggle to that. And my drawstring cord is 100% polyester. I prefer to use that rather than cotton. It just makes the finished hat a little bit more easy to take care of, like washable, for example. You don't have to worry about losing color or shrinking, and I add a toggle to that as well. I'll put that all in the description, the brand I use and links to their website. Now, the top is 4 pieces, and I cut out 2 sets of 2. I'm cutting them out right sides together, and I'm just following again along that black outline. For my unlined cap, I will cut 2 sets of 2, but if you were going to add lining, you'd cut out 4 sets of 2 using something suitable for lining. And for the visor, I like to always place my visor on a 45-degree angle if there is a print involved. I just find it more interesting. And that is just my personal preference. Now, what I'm going to show you is the way that I do my visors for all my caps, whether they're winter caps or summer caps. I'm using extra firm stabilizer from Pellon. I'll put that in the link below, but you can actually use anything that you have on hand. This is not a heavy visor, and we're going to add some extra stability to it by the way we do that outside edge. So you just use what you have on hand. It will work. So I've outlined my visor on a piece of my stabilizer, and I'm using a washable marker so that eventually it will just wash out. And I've traced the whole outline of that visor piece. I'm going to sew it onto the wrong side of the piece that's going to be the upper part of my visor, the top of my visor. So I'm just going to go around that orange line that I made when I outlined the visor piece, and I'm just using my black thread and sewing along the outline that I drew. And I'm sewing through the 2 layers. So on the other side, I have a nice black line of sewing that's giving me the shape of the visor from the back. Now, right sides together, I'm going to add a 3rd piece, and that is the underside of my visor. And I use black fleece for my winter caps. I just like to add that extra bit of shadow, some extra sun protection by using the color black on the underside, and I'm going to sew through those 3 layers just on that outside curve of the visor, following that same path that I just did. And now that all 3 layers are sewn together, at that point, I'm just going to go along that seam that I just made, cutting on the outside, just to the right of the seam, not cutting through it, but sewing or cutting very closely to it, and just go all along that outside edge and trim away that extra fabric and interfacing. Now I'll set my magnetic seam guide for 3/8 of an inch, which is my usual seam width. If I don't mention that my seam width, that's what I'm using. And I'm just going to do another line of sewing just inside that outside edge. And that's how it should look. And now I have a very stable outside edge of raw fabric on the inside of my visor as I pull the 2 pieces apart at that middle seam and bringing the right side to the outside. And now I'm just going to roll that edge with my fingers and push that seam out perfectly so it's completely out and in the center of those 2 sides of fabric where they meet up. So in the center of the seam, right at the very outside edge, and I'll just use pins or clips to hold that rolling in place as I work my way around that outside edge of the visor. And that's how it should look. And now I'm going to apply a top stitch just to finish that outside edge off. I will go about a 1/2 inch, not quite a 1/2 inch, but about a 1/2 inch. And I use my magnet again to give me that perfect even seam, just running that finished edge, that finished outside edge of the visor right up against the magnet. And choose a top stitch width that will keep you clear of the raw seam that is at the edge underneath. That seam with its double row of stitching that's inside the visor, right at the inside edge there, is really helping to give us a really nice, clean, smooth shape. And I use this method for all my visors because the results are always the same. I find they're great. So now the last step to finish the visor is to close that inside curve, and you can see it's still open. All 3 layers are open, but we're going to sew them all together along that top inside curve. So again, I'm just going to lay those 3 pieces flat above where I'm going to just close that up. And again, I'm going to follow along that first outline that I made and just sew all 3 pieces together. And now it's just a matter of trimming away the extra fabric. And what's left is a visor with the perfect raw edge. All 3 layers are perfectly matched. And it's going to go in like a breeze. But I do cut a center notch just along that inner curve because that's going to help me attach it to the band of the cap at the center front. So this visor is ready to be sewn onto the band of our cap, and I'm doing my back seams. I'm going to do them all at once. I just sewing the back seams together, right sides together with my 3/8 of an inch seam width. To continue this prep sewing, I will sew one side of each of my 2 sets of top panels for each hat together, just on the one side from the bottom up to the top point with that 3/8 of an inch seam width. And I'll do that for all my sets of 2. And now I'm going to switch my presser foot to this one that has a built-in seam guide on the right side, or you can get them on the left side, and you can get them for industrial machines or domestic machines or portable machines. And I'll leave those links in the description below. But look at how lovely that finishes the seam, because I want to sew the seam flat underneath. So on the wrong side, the seam's not going to bother your head. And on the outside, you have a beautiful double stitch. So you'll have a row of stitching on either side of your seam. And what I do is I set that little foot that's on the right side in the ditch or in the seam, and then go up one side, leaving that seam open on the wrong side and flat, and catching it with my needle and thread, sewing up one side to the top, pivot, place that little guide into the ditch, into the seam, and sew back down on the other side. And what you're left with, I think anyway, and you don't have to do this, this is an option, but I think you're left with a beautiful inside and outside, and you can trim that extra fabric away on the inside if you really want a really neat and tidy job. Or you can add some lining, and I will show you that in a minute. So I'm going to just finish up the tops while I have this foot on, and I'm going to do the same thing for the pieces that are the back of my hat. Now, what's going to happen is I will be sewing those 2 top panels together, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, but I'll just clip them together while I have them here and get them prepped, matching that seam in the middle at the top point on both sides, and just matching the bottom edges as well. So now I open up that raw seam on the wrong side of my bands at the back as well, and sew them down flat, just like I did with the top. So I still have that guide presser foot on my machine, and I'm just using it to help me make a really nice job of this. And I think you can probably see it better on this fabric. A little bit hard to see on the Sherpa, but up one side, pivot at the top, and come back down the other. We need to mark the center front of both the top and lower section of our bands. So I just do that with a small notch, something that will get buried in the seam. So don't make your notch huge, not any wider or deeper than your seam width. So just a small notch that you can see right at the center front on the upper and the lower edge of your band. And that's how we figure out where to place our visor. So match your center front notch on your visor with your center front notch of your band. The 2 outside colors are facing to get together, right sides together. So what you can see right now is the back side or the underside of the visor. And if I turned that around, you would see the wrong side of the band, the outside layer of the band. And I'm going to start in the middle at the center front. And with a seam width that's a little bit less than my 3/8 of an inch, it could even be an edge stitch. I'm just going to sew that visor in place, just matching the raw edges as I go around. And I'll just turn it over, again, starting at the middle and working to the other side of the visor. So I do half of a visor at a time, and then flip the piece over and work on the other half. And that helps me keep the visor or the band piece from stretching out of shape, and makes the placement of the visor even on both sides of the center point. And that's how it should look. If you were going to add a logo, if you have a business, a sewing business, and you're going to make these hats for your business, well, you could put it there at the center front, and you could add it now. I use a little dab of glue to hold it in place when I'm sewing. That's my cheater's tip for you folks. So sandwiching the visor between the layers, we're going to pin the lining piece now along that bottom edge, and I'm going to match those points that are the same all the way around. That includes the back seam, the center front notch that I cut on the band with the center front of the back of the visor. And this is, again, right sides together, but from the inside point of view. So the right side of my fleece inside band touching the right side of the underside of the visor. And now I'm going to make my seam width the 3/8 of an inch, and I'm going to go around the whole band, including the visor, and sew through all those layers, joining them together. And this is actually the bottom seam of the cap. And I just over sew where I started, but once you're finished, you just pull the two layers apart, exposing that seam that's joining them, and that's our bottom seam, folks. And then just bring the top of the band together, wrong sides together, so the right sides are on the outside of both layers, and just clip and pin them in place. Again, matching common points like the back seam, and also pulling out that seam at the bottom, rolling it out. And that's how it should look. Now I'm going to do a bit of top stitching. You don't need to do this if you don't want to. It'll be a little puffier at the bottom, but I'm going to do this top stitching. I'm just going to start at the point where I can get close to the edge of the visor on the ear flap, on the slope going down over your ears, and about the same distance as I did at the edge of the visor, almost 1/2 inch. I'm just going to go around, or 1.25 centimeters. And I've got my magnetic seam guide there holding my position in place. And I'll just run that fabric edge alongside the magnet to get a pretty much perfect, straight, consistent width line of sewing. And I'm sewing through the 2 layers there. And now I'm going to close up the top, and I'll just do that with an edge stitch. And once again, using my magnetic seam guide, I'm just sewing those 2 raw edges together at the top of the band. And this is another point where I add a label. I either put one on the front or the back. Normally it's at the back, but with these caps, sometimes I like to put the leather label on the front. And so there we have it. We have a band that's ready to go. If you're going to do the ear flap band and you want to add a drawstring or a chin strap, so I'm just sort of cutting a small notch at the center of the bottom of the ear flap on each side, or you can use a pin to mark the center. And I've placed my cord across the ear flap on the right side with the cut end of one cut end of the cord coming in from the top of the band down to that bottom point. And then keeping my piece of cord all in one piece without cutting it into 2 lengths. I do the same thing on the other side, bringing the end of the cord from the top of the band down to the bottom. And tacking it, going back and forth several times into place. And you can trim off any extra cord just to match the edge of your ear flap. And now we're going to put the lining in. It's the same procedure as the other ear flap band that I just showed you folks. So we're just going to go around the whole bottom edge of our band. But this time we have a cord, so we want to make sure that we tuck our cord. Our cord is sandwiched in between those 2 layers of fabric, and the end or the loop of the cord is coming out of the top of the band, which is actually the bottom of my band right now as I'm working. But if I turn that band right side up, the cord would be coming out of the top opening. And there you see it. I've sewn all the way around, and there's my cord. And then I'm just going to carefully go around the bottom edge, again, about 1/2 inch, putting in a top stitch and holding up that cord as I go past my seam guide. and doing a nice top stitch, bringing those 2 layers together at the bottom and just ending just up near where the visor starts. And I like to finish off that bottom edge with this top stitching, but again, it's optional. You don't have to do it, but let's close up that open edge at the top of the band, putting all the layers together, and now we're ready to start the top. We're almost finished now. Okay, so 3/8 of an inch seam width, putting those, opened up those 2 panels of 2 sections of the top together, right sides together, and sewing from that one bottom edge all the way up to the top point where my seams are hopefully meeting up pretty well perfectly, and going over the top and down to the other bottom edge. I'll take out my pins and just check my work. I will finish it off with the double row of top stitching and my lovely handy dandy 1/4 inch compensating foot with edge guide. And like before, I've got the guide that's on a pivot. It has a spring to it. So there's various types, but this one I love because it's very flexible and it works with me instead of against me. So I've got that edge into the seam and I'm just going along into the ditch of the seam. Up one side, pivot, come back down the other. So we have another design decision to make, and that's the placement of our top on the band. You can either use the seams to do the center front, or you can mark a center front point in the middle of a panel. So I'm going to fold my top in half, and I'll cut a notch in the halfway point in one of the panels, and I'm going to cut a notch through the center of the panel directly behind it. Folded right in half. And I'm going to match those notches now with the notch that I have on my center front band. And the center back will be where the back seam is on the band. And then I'll just go around and just work those 2 pieces together with some clips just to make sure that the fit is perfect. And it should look like this. And I'm ready to sew them together. And I'm using my 3/8 of an inch seam width again. And I'll go all the way around, working from the inside of the top through the layers of the band underneath. Finish that seam with the serge. I did it in red thread, so you can see that I did that. And I'll put it on my hat block. And it fits. And now just some finishing touches. We can put the toggle on the chin strap, cut the ends of the chin strap to a length that we feel that we want. I usually find that each length's about 18 inches long, or like the whole loop would be about a yard of cord, not quite a meter. And there you have it. So if you wanted to use a lining, I've cut this cassia cloth on the bias and made a lining, just using the same template for the top. Sew it together with an edge stitch, and there you have it. And you can mix and match fibers. I'm using a flannel there, a plaid flannel with my fleece, and I'm using solid colors of the fleece. So you can see how you can make this hat in so many different ways. And if you really want to pretty it up, then you could add a little flower pin that you make from the scraps from whatever colors you pick. And here I am with my new hat. You see how nicely it fits on the head. And if I didn't want to have that flap down, I could turn it up all the way around, and that looks really nice too. Now for the top, you could just do something simple, like just a little strip of fabric. Cut in a long strip and made into a loop like this. And this was inspired by Elmer Fudd, believe it or not, from some of the cartoon drawings. So I've cut myself a strip that's about 8 inches long or 20 centimeters long, and it's 3/4 of an inch wide or 2 centimeters wide. I've just sewn it at the halfway point on sewing the wrong sides together. And now I just push in that bit that's on the right side of my seam, the loop side of my seam, and I'm making a little loop, and I'll just sew it across the top seams of my hat. Just centering it nicely. You can pin it on one side away from where you're going to work, and your pin will hopefully hold it in place. You want to line up that little seam that made the loop with the center point of your hat, and then push the loop down. Put the same amount on each side of the center point, and you're going to make 2 loops out of 1 loop, and you'll have 2 ends, one on each side, that you can trim. And you can cut those ends on an angle, or you can just cut them straight across. You can cut them so they're the same length as the loops that they're right underneath. And just go back and forth. And now you have a little tuft on the top of your hat. You could use that to hang on a hook under your coat. So that's the straight across cut, but you could cut them on an angle like a ribbon as well. And that's just so easy to do. A little harder is making a fabric covered button that you could put on the top. And of course, you've done such a nice job, you don't need to put anything on the top. But if you wanted to, you could. And you could decorate the side of your hat, the band, with a little button that you make out of a 2-inch button and a little piece of fleece through the center. Now, we have lots of ideas in our kids' stroller hat pattern that's getting an update. So we're just about to add a visor to that pattern. And this is one that I've made for that video that's coming up next. You can sew various trim into that seam that joins the 2 panels at the top together. And you can use either side to side, turn the hat so that it's front to back, side to side. I'm going to put some ears in one just to show you. And I'll put a link to the kids' stroller cap video in the description below as well. So I've just cut 2 ears. I've used 2 pieces of fleece for each ear. So one has solid black side and one has a plaid side. And I'll just sew around the rounded edges of the ear. I'll sew the 2 layers together, right sides together, turn them right side out, do some top stitching around the sides, and just edge stitch them in place on one of my top sections. And then put them onto the top where I thought they would be nicely spaced out. And you can see from the placement of the top that this cap that I made, I've got the center front in the middle of a panel, whereas if you're going to add ears or other trim down the middle of the hat, your center front is going to be a seam of a panel. And now that's all sewn together. My finishing seam was actually side to side in this case when I sewed the 2 pieces of the top together. And I was careful when I was doing the top stitching on the ears, putting the raw edge underneath of the ear on one side of my top stitching. But it turned out really nicely. It's as cute as can be. We actually did some of these before Christmas at some of the festivals we were in, and put smiles on people's faces, and that's what this is all about, isn't it? So yes, you can do lots of ways to trim these hats, to finish them off, make them your own. You can use different fibers. You have a hat here that you can wear for just about any occasion in the winter, but mostly just when you are outside and you want to keep your ears warm. And the pin is a nice touch to make it a little fancy. The ears are a nice touch to make it a little fun. So there you have it, folks. We did it. We're through another video, another lesson in hat school. Thank you to our channel members for supporting this channel. We sure couldn't do this without you. We're grateful. And you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We're Madcap Hats there. Please like this video and subscribe. You'll really help us with the YouTube algorithm if you give us a like and subscribe. We are working on our next videos. We're going to have a lot of them this year, so stay tuned, folks. Thanks for watching. Bye.